What happened Shavuos by the Rebbe? There were a lot of farbrengens in a short amount of time. That's the answer. I'm asking myself, what can I tell you special about a particular Shavuos? I have memories, but nothing that I feel like is instructive, But that's what Shavuos was. Shavuos by all the Rebbeim was a 2-day Yom Tov, and somehow around that Yom Tov there was so much Torah. By the Rebbe, I'm learning that my Morim from Tavshin Lamed Vav. That's the year that I'm learning. So you had a Maimer of Shabbos Mavarchim. You had a Maimer of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. The Rebbe verbringt Erev Yom Tov. The Rebbe verbringt Motzei Yom Tov. And he usually verbringt the Shabbos after also. So in a span, depending on the arrangement of days, a span of 8 days, 10 days, you could have 5 Maimorim. That's how Shavuos was. By the earlier Rebbeim, it was even more. And by Rebbe also, this is something that people don't realize, that for the first 20 years of the Rebbe's Nesius, the Rebbe used to eat the Sudas upstairs in the apartment of the Alter Rebbetzin, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rebbetzin. During that time, the Rebbe didn't go home for Sudas Yom Tov. After the Alter Rebbetzin passed away, the Rebbe would go home for Sudas Yom Tov. Once the Rebbe went home, he didn't come back to 770. But during those 20 years, which finished in Tafshan Lamed, 1970, the Rebbe ate the meal upstairs. He went downstairs in his room and he stayed in his room. So 3 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe walked out of his room, walked into the shul, sat down, and said a maimer. It was one of the rare occasions where the Rebbe said a maimer without a farbrengen. Usually, the tradition of Chabad was the Rebbe said a maimer as an entity unto itself. The Rebbe said a maimer as part of a farbrengen. One of the rare occasions when there was a maimer that was not connected to any sichos was Leil Shavuos. It would walk into the shul. I don't even think they'd sing a niggin. He would just sit down and start to speak Chassidus. And this probably started Yud Bezer, Yud Gimel, the first, second, or third year of the Rebbe's Nesius, and it continued until Tavshan Lamed. There was another maimer. But by the other Rebbeim, Shavuos is 3 nights, yeah? So there was a Maimer the first night, that means the night of Tikkun. There was a Maimer the second night, the Maimer the third night. And there's Maimer Shabbos before, and the Shabbos after. Tzemach Tzedek used to say Chassidus, with full Lichpension. Erev Yom Tov, he said a Maimer, then he said another Maimer, the next night another Maimer. Shavuos was packed with Torah by the Rebbeim. And by the Rebbe was packed with Farbrengens. Mamish, packed with Farbrengenischen. There was a Farbrengen Shabbos Mavarchim, right? Then this year Shabbos is Erev Shavuos, right? Bringing Shabbos Mavarchim, there was a Farbrengen Erev Shavuos, was bringing Matzah Shavuos, was bringing the Shabbos after, and sometimes the Rebbe found an excuse to say another farbrengen still. There was a Yid whose name was Zalman Jaffe. He probably has grandchildren in this room. Zalman Jaffe's time to come to the Rebbe official was Shavuos. I remember him coming every Monday and Wednesday, Monday and Thursday. He was here all the time in my years, but for many years he was Shavuos. He was a Shavuos dicker. Chassidim HaMolech Tzaitin used to identify themselves by the Yom Tov that they came to the Rebbe. One would say, Ich bin a Rosh Hashanah dikir, I'm a Rosh Hashanah dikir. Another one would say, Ich bin a Yom Kippur dikir, I'm a Yom Kippur, Ich bin a Simchas Torah dikir. And there were a lot of Chassidim, they're Yom Tov Shavuos. Zalman Jaffe, I don't know if it was his idea or was the Rebbe's idea, he came to the Rebbe Shavuos probably beginning from the early 60s. And there were a number of very beautiful things about his coming to the Rebbe. Number one, the Rebbe told him that Yom Tov is v'samachta b'chagecha, ato u'beisecha, to you and your wife and your children. The Rebbe says you cannot come to the Rebbe without your wife because you're going to be missing the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov with your wife. So Mrs. Jaffe always came. They came as a couple. And the Rebbe hosted them. That's so interesting. The Rebbe had an apartment. The Rebbe had an apartment, 2 apartments. When they bought 770, the buildings, if you look at 770 is a house. Next to that house, there's 2 apartment buildings. Those 2 apartment buildings are full of offices. There was a time that there was a plan in those office buildings to build Adidas apartments that would belong to the Rebbe, that would be specified for the Rebbe's guests, Rebbe hosted guests. Zalman Jaffe would come to the Rebbe every Shavuos, the Rebbe hosted him. And in the Koilo, there was apartments in the Koilo. And it became crazy. I mean, the people broke the locks and they went in and everyone thought that everything belongs to them. It was the Rebbe's private space. And the Rebbe wrote a letter to Zalman Jaffe at one point saying, I must apologize that I cannot accommodate you because people don't respect private space, and the apartment which I have, which is designated for guests like you, is invaded by any yokel who needs a place to sleep. So the Rebbe says, don't come, because I cannot host you. And he wrote back to the Rebbe, of course I'm coming. I'll make my own arrangements. Zalman Jaffe was not a batlin, and he wasn't another man. He made his own arrangements, but the Rebbe felt obligated to host him, probably for a decade, probably for 10 years. He would come Shavuos, and the Rebbe would host him. Zalman Jaffe understood Yiddish, but I don't think Zalman Jaffe was a Talmud Chacham. I don't think he understood what the Rebbe was saying. I remember still, in other words, even though this is so much later, that Zalman Jaffe would sit next to his son-in-law, and the Rebbe would ask Kashis and Rashi, and they would turn to him, so how many Kashis are we holding? And he had to give a number. And Kashis could be 15 Kashis, 16 Kashis, 17 Kashis. And Shmuel Luzos, like his Unsteig, had to keep track and tell his Shver, in case the Rebbe would ask me how many Kashis. And this was part of his kiruv. When he came for Shavuos, on the Shabbos before and the Shabbos after, the Rebbe would say, Rashi Sichid, the Rebbe would just turn to him out of the blue, Nu vifel Kashis halten mir in Yiddish. How many questions are we holding? And Zalman, Shmuel would tell him, and he would tell the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had nachas. I remember once the Rebbe asked him, how many questions? Okay, let's add a couple more, so we'll have toiv, 17 kashas. The Sikha was gathered about Birchas Koyin. The Birchas Koyin has 15 words, so 15 words, stimmt 15 kashas. I'll ask two more, it'll be 17 kashas. B'gematria toiv. So he was one of the regular features of the Rebbe, Shavuos. By the time I was of age to remember, he came for Pesach, he came for Rosh Hashanah. He came for Rosh Hashanah for sure, but in the earlier years, before I could remember, he was a Shavuos sticker. And he had two shtick that are both worth mentioning. One is taka shtick, and the other is a schus. He was drawn to Lubavitch for two reasons. Number one, he had a Zayde who used to walk to Lubavitch. He had a Zayde who used to walk to Lubavitch, and he knew that Zayde. And as a little child, his Zayde used to describe them literally, gangen zu Fuss. They walked from the shtetl where they lived to walk on foot. It took weeks to walk to Lubavitch. And in his childhood imagination, he imagined what it must be like to walk to Lubavitch. He grew up in Manchester. He was a modern man. Zalman Jaffe was frum, but we'd call him today modern Orthodox. But he had this childhood memories going to Rebbe. When the Mintian Shem Tov came to Manchester, it was Rebbe Shliach, and he met Mr. Jaffe, and he talked to him about Lubavitch. All those childhood memories came back to him, and the idea of going to see the Rebbe became for him like a very exciting thing. The first time him and his wife took a trip on the St. Mary, I think it was St. Mary, it's a very famous luxury liner, and they stayed in Manhattan, Chas v'Shalom, they should stay in Crown Heights, this is inner city, and they came to see the Rebbe, but then they became, Mamish Teshavim, they became regulars in Crown Heights, they became very comfortable, and he would come to all the Fabrengenischen. But the other thing drew him to Lubavitch was the energy. Zalman Jaffe was a freilich, and he loved the singing. And he asked the Rebbe, how come nobody sings? So the Rebbe says to him, you sing. So when he was here, you see, you have to understand, this is hard for you to imagine. There was a time that they didn't sing Hu L'Keinu every Shabbos. There was a Fashetzach L'Chadeidi, for sure we never sang. Rachmanu Tzan, Hoylus did to sing L'Chadeidi. But Hu L'Keinu they didn't sing. Haderes V'Emunah, it was a big deal to get the Chazan to sing. So when Zalman was here, he would stand behind it and you start to sing. And the whole shul would give him a I can't hear you.
What was wrong with Lithuania?
I'm not going into it. It's Lubavitcher shtick. It's uptight, frigid Russian nervousness. If you don't understand this, you don't have those roots. I understand it. Some people can't bend. You know why? Because in the back of the shirt they have a stick that runs from the back of the neck till the place where you sit, and it keeps punished. It's a shtick. It's a mishagas. The Rebbe wanted we should sing, and it took years and years and years for people to start singing. The Russians were always angry that they were singing. It's so improper. It's so not. And the Rebbe was he came from Russia. They couldn't understand how a Russian guy could be so loose. They didn't understand it. So he would start to sing, and no one sang with him. And the Chaver would look at him like, you fool, you're singing about the Rebbe. It was just a serious place. Had one guy, I know this by the way, because I read his books, and I would encourage you to read it. If you want a very candid, realistic human experience of 770. Read My Encounter with the Rebbe. He printed 3 volumes already. My Encounter with the Rebbe. If you go online and Google My Encounter with the Rebbe, you can download the whole collection. I downloaded all of them till 1992 or 94, every single one. The Rebbe made him write it and publish it. And after Gimel Tammuz, his grandchildren published 3 volumes of My Encounter that goes probably through the mid-70s. They're wonderful reads, and they're so intimate. I read them and I feel like I'm in 770 because he's not writing like a chassid. He was a chassid. But he was also a human being. And his humanity was never overshadowed by his fear of the Rebbe, by his chassidus, like by most of us. So it's a very, very genuine depiction of 770. When you read his writings, the way it sounds, that's how it was. And he makes fun of people, and he tells stories about the Mishnah Goyim in 770. I mean, the published books, they took a lot of stuff out. The original My Encounter, he talks about his grandchildren losing their shoes, and anybody who came from England and something happened to them, it's in his book, and the whole world has to know 60 years on that this person had this unfortunate event happen to him in 770, in 1971 or something like that. But they're delicious. They're very wonderful. If you go online and just Google My Encounter with the Rebbe, and it'll come up. You'll see all of them. They're all available. And you download the whole collection. They're very intimate. They're very wonderful to read. Really, really wonderful to read. Anyway, so he described there was a guy named Sarge Fisher, a military guy, became a Baal Tshuva. He stood next to Zalman Jaffe in the front. I remember him. He lived in Crown Heights for many, many years. So when Jaffe would sing, Fisher would sing with him, and the whole shul would say, "Oh, Anunu Shah." So Zalman Jaffe, I don't understand you, Rebbe. You talk about Simcha, and here I come. I complain how come no one sings. You tell me to sing, and when I sing, no one wants to sing with me. So the Rebbe says, you don't have to listen to them. If the Rebbe made once with his hand, the whole shul sang. If Chas v'Shalom didn't make his hands, then Jaffe was a bad guy. The Rebbe wanted him to start the nigun, but he also wanted us to grow up. You don't only sing because the Rebbe says to sing. But that's how it was. I mean, his biggest complaint was he was invited to the Frierdiker Rebbe Suda. He was always invited upstairs. And he says it was the most uncomfortable meal in the world. He's sitting at a table, everyone's sitting up, they're in jail. I mean, they're sitting at the same table with the Rebbe, so it's not so comfortable. But he wanted to sing. So he said, Rebbe, how come in my Shabbos table we sing? How come your Shabbos table they don't sing? So Rebbe says, you should start. So he would sing out loud, and no one sang with him. He was one of the features of Shavuos. But there's another thing about Zalman Jaffe, and this is Taka Greis Shavuos. He always asked the Rebbe for more farbrengens. The Rebbe should bring again. He would come for at least 2 Shabbos. The Shabbos before, the Shabbos after, and then Yom Tov sometimes more. He had Yechidus in the Rebbe. The Kiruvim that the Rebbe gave him are unimaginable. And he would ask that maybe the Rebbe make an extra farbrengen the Shabbos before or the Shabbos after. And the Rebbe would tell him, I will try. The Rebbe used to say, the only person who says, I will try, that actually does it is me. Most people, they promise that they're going to do it, they don't do it. The person tells you, I'll try, it's basically already gave five. He said, but when I say I will try, and that there are probably a dozen farbrengens that we have in the schus of this man. Maybe a dozen as a guzman, but a lot. He would ask the Rebbe wasn't planning to farbreng, and then he would say, maybe to farbreng again. And he had that kind of relationship with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would give in. And that's one of the features of Shavuos. The result of this is what I'm saying to you. Shavuos was a saturation of Torah. That's what it was. It was a saturation of Torah. It was a lot of Torah. By the earlier Rebbeim, it was 4 or 5 Maimonides Chassidus, and by the Rebbe it also was, but it wasn't in 3 days. It was over a week or 10 days. If you count from Erev Chodesh Sivan until the Shabbos after Shavuos, you can have 5 farbrengens, which means 5 Maimorim, or even 6, depending on the year. It was gepackt mit Torah. The other feature of Shavuos was the Rabbonim, right? In Lubavitch, they used to call Shavuos Chag HaMatzos. The Rabbonim could not come to the Rebbe's Sukkahs because there were all these Shailas and the Dalet Minim and the Sukkah. They couldn't come to the Rebbe Pesach Tuchan Ashir Shailas. But the only Shaila on Shavuos is the cheesecake. If you have a fleshik oven, as most people had, can you kasher it to make cheesecake? The halacha is you're not allowed to kasher milchiks to fleshiks. You're not allowed to do it. Even if you have a self-cleaning oven, halachically you're not allowed to change it. If you use your self-cleaning oven as fleshik, apidin, you're not allowed to flip it by self-cleaning it because you're afraid you're going to make a mistake. The exception is the cheesecake and Shavuos. You're allowed to kasha fleishik of them once a year, in a way that's it's malanetzutzis, it's a liban gamur, which is what self-cleaning is considered, even though some people are asking shahs on it. And then it could be milchik, and you kasha it again. But you're not allowed to do it. So that's the only Shavuos shayla. I mean, the flowers in shul, the Babbage don't even have flowers in shul. But where do you put the flowers? What kind of flowers do you put in shul? There's not the Rabbanim shashas. There's no shaylas Shavuos. So the Rabbanim came to the Rebbe. In the earlier Deidos, they came to the earlier Rebbe in Feshtetzach. But here, the Rabbanim Shavuos was a moyed that the Rabbanim came. And the Rebbe used to acknowledge them. They came sometimes a week before, in Reish Chodesh, and the Rebbe would by the Fabringen would give them mashke. He would speak a sikha to the Rabbanim. The Rebbe very much wanted that the Rabbanim from all over the world should get together and have a meeting where they could share ideas. And the Rebbe would often make proposals for discussions for the Rabbanim. Rav Meir Hira, girls, I don't know how to tell this to you. It's the single most important job in the Jewish people. A Rebbe, of course, besides for that. There's no position more responsible and more earnest and more sacred and more maligned than a Rav who paskins shaylas. Not a rabbi who makes speeches. I do that. A Rav who paskins shaylas. A Rav Meir Hira, Yeshua Medini, sits in his house and people come to him with shaylas. When you'll get married, you'll find out what shaylas means and how important the Rav is. A Rav has to be a Yerei Shamayim, a Rav has to be a Talmud Chacham, and a Rav has to be a nice person, has to be a mensch. It's a special thing. And a Rav he's the butt of every joke. He's the punching bag, in Lubavitch especially. What we do to our Rabbanim, it's like almost a mitzvah. You make him into a Rav and then you make him miserable. But we don't have exclusive rights to that. In every community, it's the same story with Rabbanim. But by the Rebbe, Rabbanim were very important. When the Rebbe encouraged certain people to take dayanis, in other words, to study smicha, not like I studied smicha, but to actually become a Rav, Meir, Rav, a pilot, was a very special thing. It was a very, very serious thing. And the Rabbanim came to the Rebbe. A lot of them, from Eretz Yisrael and from America. And the Rebbe would tzadkezach mitzvah. And one of the areas of halacha that Rebbe would talk to, oftentimes around Shavuos, when the Rabbanim were here, was modern shaylas, new technologies, in medicine and in the kitchen. You have new appliances with new halachas that the Rabbanim should familiarize themselves with the technology, so that they could be informed when it comes to paskening a shayla. A Rav is not allowed to look at a shayla and say, if this is a pupik and this is a needle, then it's treif. He has to know what a pupik is, he has to know what a needle is, he has to familiarize himself. And this was one of the things that Rebbe talked about, Shavuos, not every year, but occasionally, and more than once I heard Rebbe discuss it, talking to the Rabbanim that when you get together, you should talk over. So that's a little bit on Shavuos. My topic that I chose, that was just an introduction, that was a hello. What I want to talk to you about, in other words, my Shavuos in Yonah de Yoima class with you, is to talk about the 6 days or the 7 days. The Rebbe brings in many sichos, the Shita Satur, that every day starting today is a Yom Tov. From today till Yud Beis Sivan, we don't tachna. And there's different opinions about why, but the Rebbe holds it's not because of Shleishes Me'akbala, it's because every day is a different Yom Tov. Reish Chodesh is one Yom Tov, Beis Sivan, which is tomorrow, is a second Yom Tov, Gimel Sivan, which is Thursday, is a third Yom Tov, Dalet Sivan, which is Friday, is a fourth Yom Tov, and Hey Sivan, which is Shabbos, was the fifth Yom Tov. Each one is a different Yom Tov. Okay, you wanted to ask me a question.
You said it Beis Sivan?
Huh?
Beis Sivan?
Yeah.
I asked you, who was Zalman Jaffe?
Who was Zalman Jaffe? He was a Yid from Manchester, who the Rebbe had a special affinity for. It was very makad of him, who built Lubavitch in Manchester, whose children are shluchim. That's Zalman Jaffe. Yep. And he came. There's probably Jaffes in this room. I mean, there's a lot of Jaffes. Anybody in the room Jaffe? Okay, we got one. Okay, you'll ask us exactly who Zalman Jaffe was. There's 5 generations at this point, from one couple. If they had stayed modern Orthodox, they would have had 2 kids. Each one of those 2 kids would have had maybe a kid. And that's what it would have been. But never became Lubavitchers, and then they had kind of children the way you're supposed to have. Go ahead.
About listening to music, so
Oh, I'm not discussing halacha, I'm sorry. Forgive me, I'm not a Rov. Speak to your local rabbi. I'm sorry, it's not my job. And it's not my expertise. So I want to talk to you about these Yom Tovs. What is the Yom Tov of Rosh Chodesh? What's the Yom Tov of Beis? What's the Yom Tov of Gimel? What's the Yom Tov of Dal? What's the Yom Tov of Hey? What's the Yom Tov of Vav? That's my class. That's my lecture. What happened today? Today's Rosh Chodesh, and it's Tuesday. That year, according to the Rabbanan, was Monday. Right? The Gemara says the Kula Alma b'Shabbos Nitna Torah. The Gemara said the Torah was given on Shabbos. We're having Shavuos on Sunday. Yidden left Mitzrayim Thursday, right? This year Pesach was Shabbos. We have Shavuos on Sunday and Monday. But the Gemara says, B'kula Alma b'Shabbos Nitn the Torah. Everybody agrees the Torah was given on a Shabbos. There's a machlokes whether it was the 7th of Sivan, in which case they arrived on Sunday, or it was the 6th of Sivan, in which case they arrived on a Monday, and that's the shita that most people go with, because that's the shita of the Chachamim, of the Rebbe. Rabbi Yasi is the Das Yochid who says that it was Zion. What happened today? They traveled from Refidim to Sinai. They took a trip. The whole Jewish nation, several million people, had to pack up all their belongings and take a walk, come to a new location and park. They went from a place called Refidim to a place called Sinai, and it wasn't very far. It could have been as little as a kilometer, a mil, a very short walk. And they traveled from Refidim, they came to Sinai, and they all rested. And the Gemara says, you know what happened on that day? Nothing happened. Nothing. The expression of the Gemara is Loi Amalu V'Lamidi. Hashem didn't tell them anything because they were exhausted from their trip. Nothing happened. Yidden came to Har Sinai, and you have to remember, they've been counting days, right? We count Omer because they counted Sfira. They were counting the days. They were so excited. They knew L'Sev Chamishim Yom. They knew that 50 days after they go out of Mitzrayim, they're going to marry the Eibishter and get his Torah and become connected to him and so on and so forth. They were counting the days. So they arrived on the location. And they come right to Moshe and knew, Moshe, what's going on? And Moshe says, come back tomorrow. Today there's nothing. Why? You're tired. What tired? We walked a kilometer. We're ready to work. Give us something to do. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. You know, it's like the story, there was about to be a Gzeira, and the Rebbe got together little children, and he said, the Gzeira wasn't his battle. What happened? Nothing happened. Yeah? So nothing is not nothing. Sometimes nothing is much more than something. And that's how the Rebbe explains it. The Rebbe in the Sicha Chelik Chavches, one of my favorite Sichas, page 7. Good to Sicha Chelik Chavches, page 7. He says, Hashem didn't tell them anything because they were tired from the trip. What's they tired from the trip? Every time the Jews traveled, physically, they traveled spiritually. And usually when they traveled, they were busy fighting and arguing and complaining. They were arguing with one another about what the travel means. And they were complaining to the Eibishter what the Eibishter wants from them. When they came to Har Sinai, there was no tarumis, they had no complaints to God, no machlokes, they had no differences with one another. They achieved Ki'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad, as one man with one heart. So the Rebbe says that journey was exhausting. To come to a place where finally Hashem tells them to move, and they're not complaining that Hashem is moving them too quick, and they're not arguing about what the meaning of the move is. That was what happened that day. The reason they were tired from the trip was not the walk. It was the pnimius dika avoida of coming to a place where they could all be happy about listening to the Eibishter, and they could all agree with one another about the meaning of what the Eibishter wants. And that's the pshat. He told them nothing. They were tired from taking the spiritual journey to the madrege of being ish echad b'leiv echad, as one man with one heart. But then the Rebbe says it deeper. That the meaning of the words Bishum Choshed Orcha means the journey of bittul. Choshed means weakness. So the Rebbe translates Choshed like the word bittul. They traveled on a road to bittul. And the Rebbe says when a person is in a state of bittul, you can't give him instructions. Because you give him instructions, they argue what does it mean? And how do you do it? You have 600,000 Jews, 600,000 opinions. So the Chosh Orcha means they journeyed to a place called the Bittul. They journeyed to a place where they were all submissive to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Eibusha didn't tell them anything, because when you're in a state of Bittul, Hashem doesn't want to, quote, ruin it by them using their minds to understand what He means and what they should do with it, and so on and so forth. So the Chodesh Nisan, Sivan, which is today, is a Yom Tov. It's the Yom Tov of nothing. That's why it's the Yom, but there's the Yom Tov of nothing, which is more than something. It's the Yom Tov of Bittul. The Yidden became nothing, which is how they achieved Ki'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad, which was the first step, the preparation for Matan Torah. The Rebbe says, to be a Jew, you need two things. A, turn your brain off. B, turn your brain back on. Turn your brain off means that when it comes to the Eibush, it's Nasav and Ishma. Turn your brain back on after you accept. Now you need to understand, and you need to argue. If you and the guy next to you or the rabbi next to you disagrees, you tell him what you think. Because you have to understand, and you have to come to the truth, and you have to know how to practice, and so on. So the Rebbe says the Hachana of Matan Torah involves both. Turning the brain off to have bittul, and turn the brain back on to use your mind to understand what the Eibishter wants. The first part of that preparation was today. So today is a Shchedish. We wouldn't say Tachlan anyway. But today is a Yom Tif. It's the Yom Tif of Achdus Yisrael. It's the Yom Tif of Jewish unity, which is a great, great, great miracle. Anybody who knows Jews knows the bigger miracle that is. But the pnim is that miracle was that Yidden achieved the bittul. That's what happened today. Okay? Reish Chodesh Sivan. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow is Beis Sivan. Beis Sivan, you look at every calendar, it says Yom HaMiyuchas, the day of our Yichas. Okay, in plain, simple English, this is the day that we became the chosen people, or the hated people, and those two go together. Today is the Atav HaChatonu, tomorrow, Wednesday. Beis Sivan is the day that the Eibusha told us, you're going to be mine, special. I'm going to have a special relationship with you, different than other nations. The Jewish people are going to be chosen. And the technical history is as follows. According to Rashi, at least, I know that Ramban doesn't agree, but according to Rashi, at least, Moshe had a rule. He only went up to Hashem very early in the morning, after his coffee, before his morning coffee, he used to say. Moshe didn't go up during the day. If he went up and he came down, he didn't go up a second, he waited until the next morning. So the Chodesh Sivan, he didn't go up to the mountain because they arrived in the afternoon. The next morning, he climbed up to the top of the mountain, and he says to the Eibishter, I don't know how he addressed the Eibishter, but the Gemara says he didn't say hello, and the Eibishter was insulted. How come he has no derech eretz and he has no menschlichkeit? So Moshe Rabbeinu said, where I come from, a slave doesn't say good morning to his master. It's considered rude. So the Eibishter says to Moshe, you should tell me good morning. You tell me good morning. What's machte? And Moshe Rabbeinu tells him good morning, which is a whole, I gave him a bracha, which is a beautiful, beautiful story. But Moshe comes the second morning, and he doesn't say hello. He shows up, and he tells the Eibush, okay, so what? What's going to happen now? And the Eibishter basically, and I know this is going to be colloquial, this is going to sound simplistic and silly and imaginative, but it's really a crisp way to bring out the story. He handed him a contract. It wasn't a written contract, it was a spoken contract, but he had a contract. And the contract says, Hashem Yidden. You know, there's a lot of communities of Jews that actually have a version of this ksuba, what the Kosten is offering, the Kala with the Kala. They read it on Shavuos, we don't read it. Avram has a song, I think we made a song out of it. Hakel Shodav Akayam. Avram Fried has a song based on this ksuba with Yidden and the Eibishter, but it's not in our, it doesn't come from the Arizal, it's not in our Nusach. He gave him a contract. What's the contract? The contract says what God is offering, what the Jewish people are offering. God says to the Jewish people as follows: I'm going to make you my favorite. You're going to be Segula, which means my treasure. You're going to be Mamlachas Koyanim, a kingdom of priests. V'goyed Kodesh, a holy nation. I'm going to make you my own. That's the deal. And there's a caveat to that. There's a very small, important piece of fine print, which is, I'll never change my mind. Hashem wrote into the contract that if you agree to my terms, you're going to be my segula, means my oitzachav, my treasure, and my kingdom of priests, and my holy people, and I will never ever disown you. No matter what you do, I'm not going to throw you away. Hashem will never replace you with another nation. This is what I'm offering. This is what Hashem says to Moshe. But then there's the other column, right? But the Jews are offering. Hashem says, you want what I'm offering? Here's what I want from you. I'm going to give you a Torah mitzvahs. And you're going to keep it forever, all of it. Now there's a small problem. What's the small problem? God lives forever, we don't. So we have to commit, right? We have to commit to raise our children. That's 3,300, and how many years since Matan Torah are we? 3,334 years, 3,334 years. Since last year was 3,333. It was kind of cool, right? 3,334 data. We're going to still teach it to our kids. We're bound. And the Abish says to the Jews, you're making the same deal I'm making. You can't get out of this. There's no divorce in this marriage. No, not in this one. If you make a commitment, I'm not letting you out of the marriage. And I'm going to do whatever I need to do to hold on to you, including do unpleasant things. This is the piece of paper that Hashem handed Moshe Rabbeinu proverbially. It said the Eibishter's offer, and at the base of that offer, I'll use the key word. It's a covenant, it's a bris. I promise I'll never change my mind, and the Eibush is good on his word. And we have to return that with a covenant of our own. I promise I'll never change my mind forever and ever and ever. Me and my children, my grandchildren, let's say, Kol HaDeiros, are dedicated, are loyal, are mandated to continue this relationship. So Moshe took the contract to the Jews. He's the lawyer, right? He's the arbitrator, he's in between. He takes the contract to the Jewish people and he gathers them all together and he reads the contract. How do the Jews respond? One word, just one, not two, one. Nasa, we're in. We commit. Wait till the end of the class, yeah? So Moshe waits till the next morning. Now it's Wednesday morning, Gimel Sivan. He climbs back up. He tells the Eibishter again, I don't know if he told him good morning, he just shows up. They signed. The Eibush has to sign, we're in. So the Eibush says, good, let's make a meeting. Let's make a meeting. So let's be clear about it. Today is a Yom Tiv because nothing happened, right? Tomorrow is a Yom Tiv, this is called Yom HaMiyuchas. Jewish identity begins on Beis Sivan, that's tomorrow. Beis Sivan, this is a day we became chosen. And we committed to God forever. And He's not going to let us off the hook? Absolutely not. He won't. He's not going to let one Jew get lost. Right? When you say, no Jew will be left behind, the Eibush is going to see to it. Because that was the contract we signed with Him thousands of years ago. Even though the people who signed that contract are dead and buried for thousands of years, but to the Eibush it's all the same. We are there, we are them, in different bodies. So that's why Beis Sivan is a Yom Tiv. Gimel Sivan is again a Yom Tiv. Because Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Eibush that they didn't agree, and the Eibush says, okay, let's make a meeting. What's such a meeting? The Eibush didn't show up to the meeting. Huh? No. And the Yidden are going to show up to the meeting, and they're going to sit together at a table. They're going to have a lawyer. The lawyer is going to be Moshe Rabbeinu. Somehow Moshe Rabbeinu was a lawyer for both sides. When my wife was on Gezunz, I bought a home. We had 3 lawyers. The buyer's lawyer, the seller's lawyer, and the bank's lawyer. And all of them got geld. But they didn't need 3 lawyers. Moshe Rabbeinu was good for the buyer and for the seller and for the bank. There was no bank involved because there was no money involved. It was given for free in the desert, like it says in Gemara and in Rambam. And Hashem make a meeting. So Moshe says to Eibush, so what's going to happen by the meeting? Hashem says to Moshe, here's going to happen by the meeting. You and I are going to talk. The Jews are going to stand and watch. They're not going to hear a word. They're not going to understand what we're saying. But they're going to see that I'm talking to you. And there's going to be 2 advantages of this. Number one, the fact that they see me talking to you is going to raise your honor in their eyes. They're going to need you because they're going to know that they have no direct communication with the Eibishter. It's through you. You're the medium, right? You're the Navi. You're the prophet. And the second advantage is they really don't want to sit with me at the same table. They don't want to meet me face to face. It'll kill them. Right? Meeting the Eibush at the same table is like walking into the sun. So Hashem says, that's what's going to happen. We'll have a meeting. We'll invite the Jews. They'll stand around, literally outside of a fence. I'll talk to you. They're not going to hear the conversation. But they'll see, they'll know, they'll witness, they'll be edis to the fact that I am talking to you. This very important thing, all the halachas of Nevuah are predicated on this edis, that the Jews will witness that Hashem talked to Moshe Rabbeinu. They're going to be witnesses that I'm talking to you. It's going to raise your honor in their eyes, and it's going to keep them alive. In other words, girls, What Hashem said to Moshe is, when I talk to a person, it's called nevuah. The Jewish people are not ready for nevuah. They're not ready. They're not pure. They're not holy. They're not clean. They're not ready for nevuah. If they'll experience nevuah, their system is going to short circuit. So they're not going to become neviim. I'm going to talk only to you. The Eibush was being very realistic. The Eibush was being very practical, very realistic. A, they're entitled to be at the meeting. B, it wouldn't be a good idea to participate in the meeting because they have to hear the Eibush, which means see the Eibush, which would be kind of difficult. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to talk to you. They're simply going to witness the conversation. And that's enough. This is what Hashem says, okay? Hashem says. This was when? On Wednesday, Gimel Sivan. This is called in Shulchan Aruch Mitzvahs Hagbala, the mitzvah of the fence. Of the fence. To separate Yidden from the place where the conversation is taking place. They're in the same room, but they're behind the mechitza. They watch Hashem talk to Moshe, but they don't participate in the conversation. This was on Wednesday, Gimel Sivan. So Gimel Sivan is a Yom Tif that the Eibishter said, I'm going to talk to the prophet, and only to the prophet, but the Jews are going to witness that conversation. And this is a very, very big part of our Messiah, of our tradition, is the credibility of Nevuah, which is based on the credibility of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is based on the credibility of Eidos. We don't believe prophecy because of miracles. We believe prophecy because we're witnesses that Hashem spoke to Moshe. This is on Wednesday, Gimel Sivan. Okay, Moshe comes down the mountain. He gathered the Jewish people. He said, hey, Chavra, Sivan Abasi, on Thursday, there'll be a meeting. The Eibush is coming to the meeting, you're coming to the meeting, and I'm coming to the meeting. But here's the reality. You're not ready to speak to God. You're really not ready to speak to God. You're not. 50 days ago, 60 days ago, you were shaku and memtes shari tuma, you were immersed in all kinds of tuma, you're not ready to speak to the Eibush. So you'll watch. And the Yidden said to Moshe Rabbeinu the famous words, they say, this is Malkeinu. If we can't talk to the Eibishter, there's no deal. If we cannot meet him face to face and talk, there's no deal. And Moshe says, I think the Eibishter is pretty smart. It was his idea. It wasn't my idea. It was his idea that you shouldn't participate in the meeting. Because you're not ready for this. And the Yidden say, whatever it costs, if we cannot meet the Eibishter face to face, we're not going through it. And what's weird about it is Moshe knows that Hashem is right, but he's so proud of the Jewish people that they're going on a suicide mission. They're going to die to meet God. He thinks that's kind of cool. So Moshe knows that this is a bad idea, but he's so excited about this bad idea, he runs up the following morning, which is now Thursday, Dalet Sivan, and he records that Eibishter, they don't like the terms. If they're signing a contract with you, you and them are going to talk direct. I'll be there, and I'll be the mashgiach to meeting on the premises, but you have to talk to them. And the Eibush says to Moshe, you're going to live to regret this. But fine. They want it, they can have it. And it's called mitzvahs prisha. That's what Dalet Sivan is called. If Gimel Sivan is called mitzvahs hagbala, putting up fences, keeping Yidden away, Dalet mitzvah should make yourself holy. You know how long it takes to become a Navi, girls? Take a wild guess. How long does it take to become a Navi in this? A lifetime! The Jews got 48 hours. You imagine that? 48 hours. Oh, men, women, and children. Not just the Rosh Yeshivas and the Grace of Tzaddikim. Every one of them. 48 hours, including the 8 of Rav. 48 hours. Make yourself holy, become a Navi. In Chumash it says, I'll take you Elisha. But they had to do some serious soul searching. 48 hours to be a prophet. And of course we all know how that story ended. Okay, so now they're very busy. They're going to mikveh and they're studying Zohar and they're doing Iskafia and they're fasting and they're doing tshuva and they're apologizing for all their chesredos and they're correcting their midas. They got 48 hours to be ready to become a Navi. It takes a lifetime, and then 48 hours. Anyway, the next day is Friday. It's Hey Sivan. And the Yidden are busy with Saka Matani, so the Yidden are very busy with their prishus. And Moshe interrupts them. And Moshe does something very, very, very important. Friday, Hey Sivan, all the Jewish people became Gedim. They were converted. How do you convert? How do you become a Ged Tzedek? Number one, you have to have a bris milah if you're male. Number two, you have to go to the mikveh. Number three, you have to accept mitzvahs. And number four, you have to bring a korban. The bris milah they did because they couldn't call b'nei chalecha, but can't korban pesach if you have no bris. So the bris was out of the way. The bris milah was not a problem, except for the few babies that were born in the couple of weeks between Lef and Simon. Now, Moshe brings a korban, and he sprinkles the blood of the Jewish people. And the Gemara says, Rashi brings it, Ein hazoyev litfila, you never sprinkle blood on a person in the Beis HaMikdash unless he went to the mikveh first. So the whole Jewish nation, they are hanging a table from the mikveh. And Moshe Rabbeinu reads what's called Sefer HaBris. There's an argument what Sefer HaBris is. Some people say it's the contract. And now the Yidden say Nasa v'nishma. Not Nasa, Nasa v'nishma. So in the middle of the 48 hours of their being so holy and busy doing tshuva and trying to make up for a lifetime of being shaku and avodah zarah to get ready to become a Navi Emes, Moshe interrupts them and he is megayah them. He collectively converts them, and their Kabbalah mitzvahs, they're committed to do mitzvahs called Nasa v'nishma. Sure. Friday night, what do the Jews do? But they were done already. They did 36 hours of this holy stuff and they were finished. Yeah, they were exhausted. So the Rebbe says, really? That's why they went to sleep? That's silly. If they knew, as I'm dramatizing it for you, they had 48 hours to become Nevi'im, they wouldn't have slept that night. But they made a cheshbon that it says in Chazal that when a person sleeps, the soul goes up to Gan Eden and it draws life. And they thought they're better off asleep. Let the neshama go to Gan Eden. And in Gan Eden they're going to learn the whole Torah and they're going to experience all kinds of godliness. The neshama in Gan Eden will accomplish much more while they sleep than they can accomplish consciously. And by the way, there's an argument to be made that because it was before Matan Torah, they were right. It's only we're after Matan Torah, that's where we stay up and learn the Torah, but they didn't have the Torah yet. So they may have been correct in their assessment and their judgment that tonight, sleep. Not sleep so you should rest. Sleep so the neshama should go to Gan Eden, you'll draw a lakus in a way that you cannot be prepared. And the chassan showed up early to the chuppah. The chassan came on time. What's the right? David is a misnagid. He came on time. What's the right? David is a chassid, huh? That he made one shir and didn't say a single chiddush. Every one of us said it. You have an idea he was a misnagid, the idea is a chassid. What's the idea? He was a svadi. He was doing a lot of singing. So everybody's happy or insulted or whatever you want. The chassan shows up. Moshe Rabbeinu wakes the Yidden up and schleps them out of the camp, and the world is shaking. And the Yidden walk up to the situation. Yeah, they washed negavasser, and they said meidani and ashekechanu, dalagud zachen, said Shema Yisrael, everything. They brushed their teeth. I don't know if they ate breakfast or not. Very important. But I don't know if they had a chance that morning. They say, was this a good idea? They're thinking to themselves, was this a good idea that we should talk to Hashem direct rather than go through the lawyer? But it's too late, right? The in is in. And the Eibusha starts to speak, which means they experience Nevuah, and their souls go flying out of their bodies. 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times. Now I never had an experience of the neshama leaving the guf, and the malachim go and they select them and bring them back and put them back into the guf using tal tchiyah. But after 10 times, the Jews said to Moshe, you know what? Let's go back to plan A. You be the prophet. You be the prophet. We'll go home and live a life. You'll tell us what God says, and we'll believe you. So the Chumash says what? That Moshe was so disappointed. Moshe, is a pasuk in Chumash. Mi yitin kol ha'mashem neviim. I love for every Jew to be a prophet. Moshe wasn't afraid that he's going to lose his position of all Yidden on Nevi'im. He was delighted by the idea. He knew it was crazy, but he was excited at the same time. And then when the Yidden quit, because why they quit? Because they died. So you die, but you're going to give up on the Nevuah because you're going to die. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Heitiv was asher dibeinu. They're right. But the way it's understood, the words Heitiv means double meaning. They were right to ask to be Nevi'im when they got to Aseret HaDibris. And they're right that the rest of the Torah, they should get through you. Both were right. The decision of the Tzeinenu Elinas as Malkeinu was the correct one. And the decision to say it's enough, Shuvu lachem la'aleichem, go live normal lives. And the Va'ata Pei Amedi Modi, Moshe Rabbeinu was going to stand Klayachim with Nebuchadnezzar and Yidden to bring to us Dvar Havayah. They were right to want to speak to me directly to the Senes HaDibris, and they're right that the rest of the Torah they're going to get from you. And that's why each day is a Yom Tif. It's a different Yom Tif. Right? It's the day of nothing. It's the day of Yichis. It's a day of fences. It's a day of holiness. It's a day of Geiros. And a day of Matan Torah. 6 days, 6 Yom Tov. Okay, Kabbalah, Satira, Besimcha, B'Pnimis.